I worked in the funeral home that handled Michael Jackson's body, and what I saw inside made me quit my job forever. I thought it would be just another night shift, another quiet body, another routine. But nothing about that night was routine. From the moment they rolled him in, I knew something was wrong. They didn't just want me to prepare him for burial. They wanted me to rebuild him. And by the time I understood what that really meant, it was already too late. It started with a phone call I wasn't supposed to answer. 2:17 a.m., that hour when the world feels hollow, when even the hum of the city sounds nervous. The ringtone cracked through the dark like a pulse I couldn't ignore. I picked up, expecting a mistake or a wrong number, but the voice on the other end didn't waste a single word. "We're bringing someone in. Clear the floor. No questions." Then the line went dead. When I stepped outside, the street was empty except for a convoy of black SUVs idling by the curb. Their engines were low, their headlights off, like they were trying not to wake the world. The air smelled faintly of exhaust and something colder. Metal, rain, maybe fear. They moved with military precision, as if this delivery had been practiced 100 times. Inside the funeral home, the fluorescent lights buzzed above spotless tile. I'd worked there long enough to know that quiet could mean peace or warning. That night, it felt like warning. The director appeared in the hallway, tie half done, skin gray under the lights. He didn't even greet me. "You're the only one staying," he said. "Everyone else clocks out." Right now, his voice cracked on the last word. I didn't argue. Within minutes, the others were gone, their shoes squeaking across the tile as they hurried out. The second the door closed behind them, the building changed. The air grew heavier, almost electric. I could hear the elevator coming up from the loading dock, slow, mechanical, deliberate. The doors opened, and 2 men in suits stepped out first. No badges, no names. They scanned the room like they were assessing a threat. One carried a clipboard, the other held a sealed envelope. Behind them, a gurney rolled forward, covered in a dark sheet from head to toe. The smell hit first, disinfectant and something older beneath it. Not rot, but the sterile, flat scent of something that shouldn't have been disturbed. The man with the clipboard slid the envelope across the counter. "Confidential assignment," he said. "You sign this. You stay. You refuse. You leave and forget this address." The papers were thick and heavy, filled with legal silence, paragraphs that said everything and nothing. I didn't even finish reading. I just signed. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe stupidity. Either way, that was my first mistake. The men wheeled the gurney past me without a word. I caught a glimpse of the tag tied to the zipper, just 2 letters and a number. It shouldn't have meant anything, but somehow it did. The sound of the wheels against the tile felt too loud, too final. The hallway lights dimmed as if the power itself didn't want to see what was happening. One of the men stopped and turned to me. "From this point forward," he said, "you speak to no one. You see only what we tell you to see." His tone was calm, rehearsed, almost gentle. That made it worse. I wanted to ask who it was, but the question died before I could speak. The answer hung in the air, heavy and unspoken. The director had already vanished. The men waited for me to move, and when I didn't, they exchanged a glance that said everything. They weren't going to wait much longer. I led them into the prep room. The smell of formaldehyde and cold metal hit immediately. I'd spent years in that space, but it suddenly felt foreign. One of the men shut off the hallway lights behind us, leaving only a single lamp glowing overhead. He cast a circle of light across the table, leaving the rest of the room swallowed in shadow. When they unlatched the straps, I could see the faint outline beneath the cover. Small shoulders, narrow frame, hands folded neatly. The shape was familiar in a way that made my throat tighten. Most bodies carry an absence with them, a kind of quiet surrender. This one didn't. It felt as if the air itself was holding its breath. One of the men stepped closer to me. "Do your job," he said quietly. "And remember, no one sees this but you." Then they turned and left as silently as they'd arrived, closing the door behind them. For a moment, all I could hear was the hum of the lamp. The rest of the building felt hollow. I glanced at the clock on the wall, but the second hand wasn't moving. Maybe it had stopped, or maybe time had decided it didn't want to witness this either. I approached the table. My gloves squeaked faintly as I adjusted them, and the sound echoed through the room like it was too loud for what I was about to do. I reached for the edge of the sheet, and my fingers hesitated. There's a rule in this line of work. Never look before you're ready. That night, it didn't matter. I already knew. Something inside me knew. The weight of the air, the careful silence, the initials on the tag. It all pointed to the same impossible truth. My hand trembled as I pulled the cover back, slow enough to feel every second crawl by. I couldn't breathe. The fabric whispered against the table as it moved, and the cold hit my face like a warning. I stopped halfway. I didn't need to see more. My pulse hammered in my ears, drowning out everything else. The light flickered once, maybe twice, and for a split second, it felt like the room wasn't empty anymore. Like something else had woken up with me standing there. I stepped back, heart pounding, eyes fixed on that still shape. The silence wasn't silence anymore. It was waiting, watching. I forced myself to breathe, to calm down, to pretend I was still in control. But deep down, I knew better. This wasn't routine. This wasn't just another night. This was something I was never meant to see. But the real shock wasn't who lay beneath that sheet. It was what they expected me to do once I saw him. The light above me buzzed like a nervous insect, flickering every few seconds as if it didn't want to see what I was about to uncover. I took a slow breath and pulled the cover back the rest of the way. The air that escaped was cold and heavy, like it had been trapped too long. I've seen thousands of bodies in my career. People who had been through fires, crashes, even worse. Nothing ever rattled me. But that night, the air itself seemed to tense, like the room knew this wasn't supposed to happen. The world outside that basement didn't exist anymore. There was only me, the light, and the body on the table. For a long time, I couldn't move. I just stared, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The skin was pale under the harsh light, almost waxy. But there was something about it that didn't belong to death. There was a strange smoothness to it, unnatural, like it had been touched by too many hands trying to make it something it wasn't. And that's when I saw it. The unmistakable curve of a jaw I'd seen 1,000 times before. Not in person, but in posters, in album covers, in photos plastered across the world. For a heartbeat, my mind refused to accept it. Then it hit me like ice water down my spine. This wasn't just another body. This was him. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. The name, I didn't dare say, burned behind my teeth. Every instinct screamed that it couldn't be true, that it was a prank, a double, something else. But even as my brain tried to deny it, my eyes wouldn't lie. The lines were there. The shape. The tiny, impossible details no imitation could carry. My legs felt weak. I pressed a hand against the cold steel counter to steady myself. Somewhere in the building, a compressor kicked on, its low hum filling the silence like an audience holding its breath. I looked around, half expecting the men in suits to return, to tell me I'd seen too much. But the door stayed closed. I was alone. The light above flickered again. For a split second, the shadow shifted across the table and something in my stomach twisted. In that stutter of light, it looked like the corners of his mouth had changed. Like they'd moved, just barely. When the light steadied, everything was still. I told myself it was just my eyes playing tricks, a mind overloaded by shock. But the feeling didn't go away. The longer I stared, the heavier the air became. It was strange how quiet it was. Usually, there's always some kind of background noise in the prep room. The pipes groaning, the faint tick of the clock. But that night, everything was still. It was like the entire building was holding its breath with me. I leaned forward, careful not to get too close, and studied the faint marks along his temple. They weren't the marks of violence. They were the kind of tiny lines that told a different story. Years of work, of pressure, of someone who had been rebuilt again and again while still alive. I whispered to no one, "What did they do to you?" The question felt wrong the second it left my mouth. The air seemed to swallow it whole. There was something else I hadn't noticed before. A faint sound in the corner of the room, almost like fabric brushing against metal. I froze, eyes darting toward the noise. Nothing moved. Still, my pulse quickened. It wasn't the sound itself that frightened me. It was the timing. It had happened exactly as I said the words out loud. I forced myself to turn back. His face looked peaceful, but not in the way the dead usually do. There was no surrender in it. It was more like waiting. Every instinct I had told me to cover him back up, to walk out and never return. But curiosity is its own sickness. I couldn't stop looking. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the flickering lights were making it worse. Maybe the long hours were finally catching up to me, but none of that explained why I couldn't shake the feeling that the room was smaller now. Like something unseen was standing just behind me, leaning close enough to listen. I turned, quick and sudden, but the room was empty. Just the table, the tools, and the silent weight of what I'd uncovered. Still, I couldn't shake the sense that I wasn't alone. I found myself whispering again, maybe to calm my nerves, maybe because part of me hoped someone would answer. "You don't deserve this," I said softly. "No one does." The light flickered again, harder this time, and for a heartbeat, the reflection on the steel counter looked like a second face beside mine. I blinked, and it was gone. I stepped back until my shoulders hit the wall. My chest was tight, my pulse erratic. I didn't believe in hauntings or spirits, not really. But that night, I started to believe in something worse, memory that refuses to die. I don't know how long I stood there. Time moved strangely, elastic, stretching and collapsing all at once. I kept staring, and every time the light dimmed, I thought I saw something new. A shift in posture, a tiny tilt of the head. It never lasted more than a blink, but I saw it. I know I did. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed the edge of the counter and forced myself toward the door. My gloves were slick with sweat. My vision tunneled as I reached for the handle. I needed air. I needed distance. But just as my hand touched the cold metal, a soft click echoed through the room. One of the metal instruments on the tray had rolled, slow and deliberate, like someone had brushed past it. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I just stood there, frozen, while that tiny piece of steel finished its slow journey to the floor. It landed with a hollow sound that seemed too loud for such a small thing. When I finally found the courage to glance back, the body was still exactly as I'd left it. Nothing had moved. The reflection of the lamp trembled slightly in the polished table. But something deep inside me knew it wasn't over. I stepped into the hallway, my heartbeat echoing louder than my footsteps. The elevator was still there, its doors half open, as if waiting for me to run. I almost did. But something stopped me. A single, simple thought that lodged itself in my mind and refused to leave. If this was really him, if this was truly who I thought it was, then what were they planning to do with him now? I didn't know it yet, but that question was about to destroy me. Because when the men came back the next morning, they didn't ask how I was holding up. They didn't ask what I saw. They only handed me a folder and said 6 words that made my blood run cold. Make him look exactly like before. They came back just after sunrise, 3 of them this time. I hadn't slept, hadn't even left the prep room. My eyes burned from the fluorescent lights. I could still feel the weight of the night pressing against my skin. The man with the clipboard didn't bother with greetings. He set a heavy black folder on the counter and slid it toward me like a verdict. Read it, memorize it, then destroy it. His tone was dry, flat, official, but his eyes avoided mine. I opened it. Inside were pages of typed instructions, precise to the point of cruelty. Measurements, proportions, references. Each section was marked with a date, a year that matched a different era. The photos clipped beside the notes showed the same face evolving through time. Every smile, every pose perfectly lit. My stomach turned. These weren't medical documents. They were design blueprints. One of the men leaned closer. You'll follow the instructions exactly. No deviations. If you need anything, you'll find it in the storage crate downstairs. His expression didn't waver, but his knuckles whitened against the folder. I asked what this was for, though part of me already knew. His answer was almost gentle. We're restoring a legacy. That word, legacy, hung in the air like smoke. They left as quickly as they came, the door whispering shut behind them. The silence that followed was heavier than any noise. I turned back to the folder. The paper smelled faintly of chemicals, maybe new ink. Every page told me to erase something, to peel away years, mistakes, damage, anything that looked human. There was no mention of a service, no audience, no mourning, only completion. The next few hours blurred. I paced the room, folder in hand, reading and rereading until the words swam. The instructions demanded precision beyond anything I'd ever attempted. It wasn't preservation. It was reconstruction. perfection demanded by people who didn't understand what perfection costs. By midday, I went down to the basement to find the crate they'd mentioned. It sat in the middle of the floor like it had grown there overnight. No labels, no locks. I lifted the lid and froze. Inside were materials, fabrics, cosmetic tools, molds, and something else I couldn't quite name. Everything gleamed under the dim light. Whoever packed it knew exactly what they were doing. At the bottom lay a stack of glossy photos. They looked like press stills, magazine covers, moments pulled from a life performed for cameras. The kind of pictures that make people forget the person underneath. I flipped through them until I reached the last one. It was different. Older, more fragile. A studio portrait from decades ago. The edges were frayed, and on the back, written in blue ink, were 4 words: "He has to shine." I stared at that sentence until my vision blurred. Upstairs, the building was silent. The staff had been sent home indefinitely. It was just me now. I carried the folder to the prep room, set it on the table, and tried to steady my hands. I told myself this was just work, that it was temporary, that I could do my job, collect my pay, and forget. But even as I thought it, something deeper pushed back. Some part of me whispered that once you start rewriting what's gone, you can never stop. The hours slipped away. I didn't eat, didn't drink. The only thing that existed was the list, page after page of impossible standards. Every instruction made me question where the line between care and control actually was. Then came the section titled Final Presentation. I shouldn't have turned the page. It outlined lighting specifications, angles, lenses. It mentioned visual confirmation for archival purposes. But what stopped me cold was the last line, bold and underlined. Subject must appear capable of movement. I read it twice, 3 times. The words didn't change. A chill crawled up my spine. Capable of movement? What did that even mean? It wasn't my job to question orders, but this wasn't preservation. It was something else. I dropped the folder, the pages scattering across the floor. I crouched to gather them, hands shaking. The lights flickered overhead, and I felt that same pressure again, like the air itself was leaning closer. For a moment, I thought I heard something. Soft, rhythmic, almost like the faint echo of footsteps in the hallway. I straightened, listening. Nothing. The silence folded in again, thick and absolute. I tried to convince myself that exhaustion was playing tricks on me, but even then, I could feel my heartbeat sinking to that phantom rhythm, like something unseen had chosen to share its pulse with mine. By the time I turned the key in the supply cabinet, I'd stopped pretending I understood what I was part of. Every action felt rehearsed, like I was following a choreography I didn't remember learning. At one point, I caught my reflection in the polished metal of the cabinet door, pale, hollow-eyed, shaking. I didn't look like someone doing a job. I looked like someone being used by it. When I finally packed everything back into the crate, the folder still sat open on the table. The air around it seemed warmer, thicker, as if the paper was giving off its own heat. My eyes fell again on the last note at the bottom of the final page. He must look eternal. I don't know why that word hit me so hard. Eternal. As if this was never about saying goodbye. I stepped away, every muscle in my body taut, my throat dry. The lamp hummed overhead, casting the faintest tremor across the floor. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Somewhere in that trembling silence, I realized the truth. They didn't want me to preserve what had been lost. They wanted me to build a lie convincing enough to live forever. I leaned against the wall, eyes fixed on that folder, and whispered to myself, "This isn't restoration. It's resurrection." The word tasted wrong, metallic. And that was the moment I knew I was in too deep. But the moment I started following those instructions, something inside that room began to fight back. Something that didn't want to stay finished. The next day bled into the one after it. I stopped checking clocks. Time didn't belong in that room anymore. It just hung there, thick and motionless, like the smell of chemicals. I told myself I was only following instructions. That's how I justified every step. The way people tell themselves rules will protect them when they already know they won't. The folder sat open beside me, its pages curling at the edges, every line daring me to keep going. The work itself became mechanical at first. I set out the materials, arranged the lamps, lined up every instrument until the room looked more like a stage than a workspace. The silence pressed in close enough to make my ears ring. Somewhere above me, pipes groaned in the ceiling like an audience shifting in its seats. Each task was supposed to bring me closer to completion, but the deeper I went, the less I understood what completion even meant. The air in that place started to feel charged, the kind of charge you get right before a thunderstorm. Heavy, expectant, impossible to breathe. I moved slower as the hours dragged on, every motion deliberate, almost ritualistic. I'd been doing this job for years, but this was different. It wasn't about restoring what time had taken. It was about creating something that had never existed. The binder's words replayed in my head. He must look eternal. Sometimes when I'd pause to rest my hands, the faint hum of the fluorescent light seemed to sync with my heartbeat. I'd glance toward the door, half expecting to see one of those men watching from the hall, but it always stayed empty. Still, I couldn't shake the sense that I wasn't alone. The more I worked, the stronger that feeling became. It wasn't noise or movement. It was awareness. Like the room itself had started paying attention. I caught myself whispering apologies under my breath every time I made a mistake, as if someone invisible was judging the result. By the second night, the exhaustion had settled into my bones. My vision blurred around the edges. I'd close my eyes for what felt like a second, and when I opened them, things in the room wouldn't be quite where I'd left them. A chair turned slightly. A tool rolled half an inch closer to the edge of the counter. I wanted to blame fatigue, but fatigue doesn't make you hear music. It started faint, just a few notes, the kind you could mistake for machinery. But after a while, there was rhythm to it, a slow, familiar beat threading through the hum of the vents. It would fade whenever I tried to focus on it, then return when I stopped listening. I laughed once, sharp and nervous, just to hear something human. My voice bounced off the walls and came back smaller. I began to talk out loud while I worked, not to anyone exactly, just to keep myself anchored. I'd mutter instructions, curse at the uncooperative lights, say things like, "Almost done," or "That'll do." Each phrase sounded wrong in the stillness, like dialogue in a play no one else had agreed to perform. Around dawn on the third day, I caught my reflection in the small stainless mirror above the sink.
I barely recognized myself. My eyes looked sunken, my skin gray from the fluorescent glare. I looked less like a person and more like one of the things I was supposed to preserve. Drained, hollow, waiting.
That was when the folder slipped off the counter and hit the floor with a soft thud. The pages fanned out, scattering across the tile. I bent down to gather them, my knees aching from standing too long. When I straightened, the air in the room had changed again. It felt thicker, heavier, alive. The light above me dimmed, just slightly, and in that dimness, the hum of the vents seemed to pulse faster, syncing again with my heartbeat. I stood there, breathing shallow, staring at the empty space in front of me. Nothing moved.
Still, I whispered, "I know you're here."
The words left my mouth before I could stop them. I didn't even know who I was talking to. Maybe it was guilt, maybe madness, but it felt like someone or something was listening. I forced myself back to work, though every motion now felt watched. My hands shook so badly I had to steady them against the table. I tried humming under my breath, anything to drown out the growing noise in my head. That's when the power flickered. Just once, but enough to make the shadows leap across the walls. For an instant, I thought I saw movement. Something tall, slim, gliding past the far corner of the room. When the light steadied again, the corner was empty.
I pressed my hands against my temples and exhaled. "You're tired," I told myself. "That's all. You're just tired."
But the air didn't agree. It vibrated softly, like it was holding a breath of its own. I decided to stop for the night. I packed up the tools, stacked the folder neatly on the counter, and turned toward the door. My fingers brushed the switch, but before I could flip it, I heard a faint sound behind me. A soft tap, then another. It wasn't the hum of machinery this time. It was deliberate, rhythmic, like fingertips keeping time on the metal table. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. My whole body locked up, every muscle screaming that I needed to leave. But curiosity won again, cruel and insistent. I turned.
The table was empty. Nothing moved. The sound had stopped.
But something new had appeared. A small smudge on the polished surface. It looked like the print of a single gloved hand. I told myself it must have been mine, some residue I'd missed while cleaning. I grabbed a cloth and wiped it away, but my hand wouldn't stop shaking. When I stepped back, the mark was gone. For a heartbeat, I felt relief. Then I looked down at my own palm and saw a faint trace of white powder clinging to my skin, bright under the light. I dropped the cloth and backed toward the door. The folder sat open again on the counter, though I could have sworn I'd closed it. The final page faced me. The last line stared back in black ink. He must look eternal. I whispered the words once, quietly, and the hum in the room deepened, like something hidden behind the walls was answering. That was when I realized I hadn't been restoring anything. I'd been awakening it. I should have stopped that night, but I didn't, because the next morning when I walked back in, I heard it. The slow, steady rhythm of something breathing. The first sound came just before dawn. At first it was faint, so soft I thought it was the air vent. The hum in that room had become part of me, a constant white noise that filled every gap in my thoughts. But this wasn't the hum. It was slower, deeper. It pulsed in and out like the world exhaling through the walls. I froze mid-step, one hand still on the edge of the counter. The noise stopped. Silence returned, heavy enough to press against my eardrums. I told myself it was the pipes, the compressor, my own heartbeat, anything ordinary. But when it came again, it was unmistakable, slow, steady, like lungs practicing after a long rest. The air in the room seemed to move with it. Every breath pulled the temperature down a fraction, as if the sound were stealing heat from the space itself. I didn't call for help. I didn't even think about it. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew what the suits would say. That stress makes people hear things. I'd signed too many non-disclosure forms to risk proving them right. Instead, I stood there, counting the rhythm. 4 seconds in, 5 seconds out. A pattern that didn't belong to machines. Every instinct in me screamed to run, but curiosity is its own sickness. I found myself leaning closer to the sound, drawn in the way a moth drifts toward a flame. The closer I got, the clearer it became. Not just a hiss of air, but a pull, a drag, a whisper between breaths. My throat went dry. I whispered, "Who's there?" Nothing. Just the soft rise and fall that wasn't supposed to exist. I felt the air hit my cheek. Cold. Real. That was when I stopped calling it a body. The silence after each breath was louder than a scream. It filled the space until my thoughts warped around it. I backed toward the doorway, half expecting the lights to flicker again, half expecting something to move in the dark corner where the hum was strongest. But nothing moved. The noise simply kept going, steady as a heartbeat. I pressed my palm against the door frame to steady myself. The metal felt warmer than it should have been. I wanted to leave, but leaving would mean admitting I'd heard it. If I stayed, maybe I could prove it was just the building settling, a draft through the vents, a trick of pressure. So I stayed. The rhythm continued for what might have been minutes or hours. I lost sense of time again, measuring the world only by the rise and fall of that sound. I could almost predict it, like the ocean breathing in and out. Then, without warning, it stopped. The silence slammed down so suddenly I stumbled backward. My pulse filled the gap it left behind, racing loud enough to make me dizzy. I whispered again, but the word caught halfway out of my throat. The air tasted metallic, sharp. And then, one single breath, longer this time, dragged out like a sigh too tired to finish. I couldn't stand it anymore. I bolted to the hallway and leaned against the wall, gasping like I'd been underwater. My vision swam. The corridor lights flickered once, and in that flicker, I thought I saw movement behind the frosted window of the prep room. Just a shadow shifting across the glass. When the light steadied, the window was empty. I waited there until the first thin rays of morning crept through the high window slits. I told myself I'd imagined it all, that I'd been awake too long, that my mind had turned the hum of machinery into ghosts. But deep down, I knew better. It felt like something ancient had been waiting for me to finish my work. I forced myself back inside. The air was still cold, but the sound was gone. The stillness felt worse than the breathing had. Too complete, too final. The room no longer felt like a workspace. It felt like a place that had decided to keep secrets. I tried to act normal. I cleaned the counters, stacked the tools, straightened the folder the suits had left behind. My hands moved, but none of it mattered. I couldn't stop listening. My ears strained for the smallest shift in air, the faintest sign that the rhythm would return. It didn't. Not then. But the smell in the room had changed. It wasn't chemicals anymore. It was something faintly sweet, like perfume that had been sealed away for years. I stepped back, heart pounding, realizing it was coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. I left the room before I could start imagining faces in the shadows. When I reached the main corridor, the security guard on the morning shift nodded at me. "You okay?" he asked. I opened my mouth to answer, but the words caught. What could I say? I think I heard breathing in a locked room. He'd laugh, or worse, report it. So I just nodded. "Did some overtime," I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. I walked out into the morning light, blinking against the sudden brightness. For a second, I thought the fresh air would wash the sound from my ears. It didn't. The rhythm followed me, faint but constant, tucked somewhere behind the noise of traffic and birds. When I reached my car, I rested my head against the steering wheel. My hands were trembling so badly I couldn't hold the keys steady. I told myself I wouldn't go back inside, that I'd quit, drive away, never speak of it again. But later that afternoon, the phone rang. A different voice this time, clipped and calm. "We're ready for the next phase," it said. "Bring your kid. He needs to be dressed." I didn't argue. I just sat there, staring at the silent receiver long after the line went dead. That was the moment I realized none of this had ever been about a funeral. And when they dressed him up for the showcase, I understood the truth. This was a performance, and I was the final act. The men arrived before sunrise, moving with that same quiet authority I'd come to dread. No greetings, no explanations, just orders. One of them handed me a clipboard with a short list: wardrobe, lighting, time schedule. They'd already chosen everything down to the color of the bulbs. It wasn't a funeral anymore. It was a production. They wanted the prep room cleared and transformed. A backdrop of white cloth was hung against the far wall. Studio lights were rolled in. A camera tripod stood in the corner, waiting. The sound it made when it clicked into place was sharp enough to make me flinch. I kept asking what this was for, but no one answered. They just repeated, "It has to be perfect." That word again. Perfect. It had stopped meaning anything days ago. They gave me new clothes to put on him. Formal, crisp, untouched. The tag still hung from the sleeve. I couldn't stop staring at it. It felt wrong to see something so clean in a room that had already stolen so much life from me. When the lights came on, they were blinding. The heat from them soaked the air, turning the sterile chill into something close to stage warmth. The men spoke softly among themselves, adjusting angles, lowering shadows, positioning reflectors. Everything had to be precise. I stood in the corner, forgotten, waiting for a cue that never came. My heartbeat had found that same rhythm again, the one that matched the breathing I'd heard. I told myself it was nerves, but it wasn't. It was memory. Someone called my name. "Final check," he said. His tone wasn't cruel, it was bored, procedural.
That somehow made it worse. I stepped forward, gloves in hand, trying not to think, trying not to feel. The air was thick with a chemical sweetness. The camera's red light blinked once, then steadied. Every click of the shutter made me flinch. With every flash, the room seemed to change. The white backdrop looked less like fabric and more like a shroud. The corners of the space darkened, closing in. The heat from the lamps made it hard to breathe, but I kept going. My hands worked on instinct, checking seams, straightening fabric, avoiding the gaze of everyone else in the room. Then I felt it again. Movement, faint and impossible. It wasn't sound this time. It was vibration. A tremor through the floor that stopped the moment I noticed it. I looked around, but the others didn't react. They were too busy composing the perfect image. Another flash. For an instant, it looked like his head had turned slightly toward me. I blinked hard. When my vision cleared, everything was as it should be. Still, lifeless, posed, but I couldn't shake it. My pulse thundered in my ears. The photographer took another shot, and this time the reflection in the lens caught something. Just the faintest shimmer, like heat rising off pavement. The man behind the camera muttered, "Beautiful." The word made my stomach twist. Beautiful wasn't what this was. The lead agent leaned close to the camera's screen, reviewing the photos. He smiled for the first time since I'd met him. "He looks alive," he said. Another replied, "That's the point." My legs went numb. I took a step back, needing air. The lights flickered once, briefly, like a breath being taken. Nobody noticed but me. When it was over, they packed everything up in silence. The backdrop came down. The lights clicked off, leaving the room dim and ordinary again. All that remained was the faint smell of ozone from the flashbulbs. They didn't thank me. They didn't speak at all. They simply wheeled the gurney toward the door, as careful and deliberate as they'd been that first night. The wheels squealed against the tile. Short, sharp, uneven. Just before they reached the hallway, I swear it happened again. The faintest tilt of the head. A fraction of an inch. Maybe the light playing tricks. Maybe not. One of the men paused, hand on the door handle. "Good work," he said without looking back. "You made him perfect." The door shut behind them, and the silence that followed felt enormous. I stood there long after they were gone, staring at the empty space where they'd stood. The smell of smoke from the lamps lingered, clinging to my clothes. Something in me broke quietly then. Not a snap, but a slow unraveling. I realized that what we'd just done wasn't about honoring a life. It was about rewriting it. It wasn't a showcase of memory. It was proof of control. And as the echo of their footsteps faded, I understood something far worse. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something I'd helped create without meaning to. I thought it was over when they took him away. But that night, when I got home, I realized the showcase hadn't ended at all. It had followed me. I told myself I wouldn't think about it again. I'd done my part. The room was empty now, the folder gone, the lights packed away. But silence doesn't erase memory. It just gives it space to breathe. That night, I drove home with the windows down, hoping the cold air would clear my head. The highway was deserted, the city distant and small behind me. My hands kept tightening on the wheel every time I saw headlights in the mirror.
None of the cars stayed long. They passed and vanished into the dark.
When I reached my apartment, the world felt off balance. The hallway lights buzzed too loudly. The floor seemed to hum under my feet. I tried to convince myself it was exhaustion, but the rhythm was too familiar. Slow. Even. Like breathing through walls.
I poured a drink I didn't want and sat at the kitchen table waiting for silence to feel normal again. It didn't. The hum followed me through the sink pipes, through the vent above the stove, through the heartbeat in my ears. Every sound in that place bent toward the same rhythm, the same pulse that had filled the prep room.
I turned the radio on for distraction, but every channel dissolved into static. Beneath the noise, I could swear I heard a faint tune. Not a song, exactly. Just a few trembling notes, the shape of something half remembered. It was enough to send a shiver down my spine. I switched the radio off. The sound didn't stop. That's when the apartment went cold. Not gradually. Suddenly, like someone had opened a door to winter. The curtains stirred though the windows were locked. I stood, every hair on my arms rising. No, I whispered, as if saying it out loud would undo the truth that had been following me. A faint knock came from the hallway. Once, twice, slow. I told myself it was a neighbor, a trick of the old building settling, but the knocks matched that rhythm again, steady, deliberate, patient. I didn't move. My pulse synced with it, faster at first, then falling into the same tempo. The air tasted metallic, dry. When I finally forced myself toward the door, I found nothing there. The hallway was empty, washed in the yellow glow of the security light. But something small lay on the floor just outside. A folded piece of white cloth, crisp and clean. I didn't pick it up, I just stared. It looked too new, too deliberate. A tag still hung from the edge. I recognized it instantly, the one I'd left behind. My throat closed. I stepped back, slammed the door, and locked it twice. For a long time, I leaned against the wood listening. Nothing. But silence doesn't mean peace. It just means you've run out of explanations. I stumbled back to the table, trying to breathe. My hands were trembling. That's when the light in the living room flickered. Once, then again. The same pulse. I whispered, "What do you want?" No answer. Only the faint echo of air moving. Soft, deliberate, real. I felt it brush against my cheek, cold and careful. Every instinct in me screamed to run, but curiosity is its own sickness. I turned toward the sound, half hoping to see nothing at all. The room was empty, yet the air felt crowded, dense, alive. I don't remember falling asleep, but I must have, because the next thing I knew, the sun was bleeding through the blinds. For a moment, I thought it had all been a dream. Then I saw it, on the kitchen table where my drink had been. A single photograph. It wasn't one of mine. It was from the showcase. Same lighting, same backdrop. Only now, there was something different about it. In the corner of the frame, barely visible, stood a shadow that looked a little too much like me. My chest tightened. I turned the photo over. In the same blue ink I'd seen once before, someone had written 4 words. He has to shine. I dropped the picture and backed away. My mind tried to find sense in it, but sense had left this story a long time ago. The apartment felt smaller by the second. The walls breathed with me.
The rhythm grew louder, steady, calm, almost reassuring. That's when I realized it wasn't coming from the building. It was coming from inside me. The showcase hadn't ended at all. I'd brought it home. And when I finally went back to the funeral home to quit, the room wasn't empty anymore. Someone or something had been waiting for me to return. Final payoff.
When I finally went back to quit, the front door of the funeral home was unlocked. No lights, no sound. Just that same heavy air waiting for me. The hallway smelled like dust and ozone, the faint sweetness I could never name still hanging in the vents. I followed it down to the prep room. The lights were already on. The table was empty, except for a single chair facing it. On the chair sat the same black folder, pristine and waiting. My signature still marked the first page. And then I heard it. Slow, steady, that impossible rhythm that had followed me home.
The folder fell from my hands.
A voice, familiar, quiet, almost kind, whispered from somewhere behind the light.
"You did good work. Now finish it." That's when I understood. I hadn't rebuilt him. They'd been rebuilding me.